Welcome to Season 6 of the One Inside an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm Tammy Sollenberger, author of The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self. This podcast is for anyone curious about their inner world and who have a desire to connect to that authentic self. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I am so excited to have my friend Peter Malinoski on the podcast today. Peter is an IFS Level 3 trained PhD president and co-founder of Souls and Hearts. He's a clinical psychologist. He produces a podcast called Interior Integration for Catholics. He writes articles. He has this amazing community called the Resilient Catholics Community. What else am I missing? I mean, you live on a farm. Oh, here's the other thing. You delight in ultimate frisbee.
Yes, I do.
I was like, wait, I didn't know that. So, Peter, tell everybody where you are in the world and what you see when you look out your nearest window.
Sure. So I am on the southeast side of Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm actually on 5 acres, and our lots here were just outside I-465, not far from the interstate. So when I look out my back window, because I have a home office, I can see back, in the wintertime, I can see back almost a quarter mile. That's the length of my property. It's really narrow and long. And see my barns. I can see my orchard.
And what are you raising right now? Like, what's in season for farming?
So it's a little quiet. We have only one crop left in the ground, and that's carrots, because they tolerate frost really well, and they actually get sweeter. So carrots are in the ground. And then after that, it'll be pretty quiet until we start maple syruping in February. So
tapping the maple trees.
That's right.
Yeah. We do that up. I mean, I don't do that, but I see up in New Hampshire, it's so fun to drive by these places and see this not wire, but cabling or some tubing. The tubing. And you're like, what is that? And you're like, oh my gosh, it's this amazing wires of tubes on these trees that's all collecting maple. So really cool. I have to tell you that I actually don't like real maple dressing. I like our syrup. I like cheap. You
like the, Yeah.
I know. I mean, don't tell anybody that. Okay, so I'm super excited. So let's just start with this idea of you have done this amazing job of bringing these two communities together, the Catholic community and the IFS community. So tell me about this integration and this bridge of building these two amazing communities together.
So I'm a cradle Catholic, been Catholic my whole life. It wasn't until 2017, 2016 that I found out about IFS. No word of that in grad school. It wasn't on my radar at all. I was trained originally in cognitive behavioral psychology or cognitive behavioral therapy, and just found that I really struggled with that just because I was working with people that had really complex issues, and then really retreated into health and rehabilitation psychology. I wanted to find something where I knew I could be doing some good, and so I got into, hypnosis for pain control and smoking cessation and stuff like that. Always looking. And then after I graduated, I worked with a psychodynamic supervisor, a psychoanalyst, and learned about depth psychology. I was like, oh, this is really great. I mean, I had heard about Freud and, Adler and Jung and so forth, but I was always wanting to get to the root of things, right? And then went through some other things, EMDR, but it was when I had a client that I started to get more clients that were, quote, diagnosed, end quote, with multiple personality disorder or DID. And I was like, I've got to learn something about parts. There's something about this part stuff. And so in 2018, in August, I went to level 1 training. But this is back in the day when it was retreat style and you went away for a week and then you had some time off, you went back another week. And I absolutely fell in love with IFS. I was just like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. So in 17 months, I completed level 1 training, level 2 training, level 3 training in IFIO. In 17 months. I spent a month and a half of that, away on trainings because I was just like, this is amazing. And I thought to myself, I've got to find a way to bring my two peoples together, my IFS peoples and my Catholic peoples. And that was when, it was during that time that we started to think about, really trying to bring the best of psychology to the Catholic community through Souls and Hearts. And it was in November of 2019 that Dr. Jerry Creed and I launched Souls and Hearts. And so, so that was sort of started out, and we started the podcast, Interior Integration for Catholics, in March of 2020. When we were all locked down, with the pandemic, and then a community kind of grew up around that. People that wanted to be able to connect. And then from there, I was really inspired by all of the wonderful work that people were doing in IFS outside of the consulting room, outside of therapy. And so I was really like, what could we do to kind of make this like a huge affinity group, if you will, right? Like of folks that, had a sense of togetherness and connection already because of being being Catholic together, and then bringing this in. Because I will tell you something. I want to actually, can I read you a quote?
Yeah.
From a book. This is from this is part of the reason why I'm so excited about IFS, because I see it as such a huge leap forward in understanding ourselves as human beings. And so I compare it to the big thing in the 20th century was Freud and the popularization of the unconscious. And so I see parts and systems thinking, that Dick Schwartz has brought in, as the big thing in the 21st century. I think it's going to really take off. So this is what Lancelot Law White said in 1960 in his book, The Unconscious Before Freud. He said, quote, "The general conception of unconscious mental processes was conceivable in post-Cartesian Europe around 1700. So about 1700, people were thinking about the unconscious mental processes. It was topical around 1800, and it was fashionable around 1870 to 1880. So this is before Freud is writing. It's fashionable to talk about the unconscious. It cannot be disputed that by 1870 to 1880, the general conception of the unconscious mind was a European commonplace, and that many special applications of this general idea had been vigorously discussed for several decades. But here's the thing. The Catholic Church didn't even mention, the Vatican didn't even mention the unconscious until 1952. So 250 years after it was conceivable, 150 years after it was topical, 3 generations after it was commonplace, the church kind of begins to address this. And I'm like, we can't have that. Like, I really, with this next wave, I really want this to be something that people can embrace and do it in a way that is consistent and it feels safe and feels comfortable to their parts. That this is compatible with Catholicism. So this is the big dream, to kind of bring these two together, and I think there is so much compatibility there. So.
Yeah. Have you gotten a lot of pushback as you're like to the capital C church that you're
Right,
like, okay,
right.
I'm bringing IFS and multiplicity to the capital C church. Have you gotten pushback? Are you like, what are you getting?
We really haven't, to be honest. I think we're still too small. We have about 4,700 members of Souls and Hearts, people that are active in one way or another with us. But I think we're such a drop in the bucket that it hasn't really even registered. We do occasionally get folks, abbots and mother superiors of different religious communities and folks coming to us. But I think what we're experiencing now is like the very early adopters are coming out, like the people that are really willing to pioneer, really willing to step out, because it can be a really big, as you know, right, a big jump to say, wait a minute, I have parts. I don't have a single unitary personality. This is such a new kind of way of thinking that I think it's just hard for people to take that in, and begin to really absorb that. But what really floated my boat about this, and the reason I'm so excited about it, is that I think IFS actually helps us to understand ourselves and each other in a way that really fosters the capacity to love. And that's really what it's all about. That's what it's all about for me. That's what really ultimately this is all about. Can we tolerate being loved because everybody thinks that, sometimes it's easy to be loved. And I'm not so sure, right? Can we tolerate being loved? And then can we love wholeheartedly? Can we love in a way that brings in more and more of our being, not just with the parts that are tasked with, our social relationships or whatever, but can we bring the fullness of our being together in that?
Okay, so let's kind of hang out here because I'm really curious about these two things. Like why is it hard or difficult for our parts to be loved, to be loved, to accept love, and why is it hard for us to give love? And I'm also curious if people are even noticing like that's even a thing. Like that's, oh,
Right,
can I
right,
accept love? Can I receive
right,
love? Can I give
right.
love? So yeah, I'm really curious about that. And I'm also curious if those are sort of two different types of parts, like ones that have a hard time receiving and ones that have a hard time giving. That's probably a lot of questions, but
No, that's okay. Well, we're in a perfect time of the year to discuss this because I have an example of what so many of our parts want and expect when it comes to love, and that is Hallmark movies.
oh.
Hallmark movies. Where love is easy, it's painless to accept, it doesn't really demand anything, we don't have to change, we just have to feel better, right? And
Well, you have to move from New York City to your old hometown and fall in
that's
love with the guy
right.
that you used to love. You have to do
That's right.
that. But
And
besides
there
that,
and there has to be cocoa, you have to have hot chocolate.
and fake snow with no one having their jackets zipped up. And I'm like, hello, you have your jacket zipped up when it's snowing. Watch how many Hallmark movies they do not have their jackets zipped up. None of them. Okay, sorry.
So maybe we're being a little hard on those, so any parts that are out there in the audience that love Hallmark movies, it's okay. Get it. I get it.
I get it too. I love them
Yeah.
too.
So,
Just zip
but
up
I
your
mean,
coat.
I think what happens is that in order to be loved, we have to be known. And that means that parts might feel really exposed, really vulnerable, really raw. And if you go back to Genesis 3, Adam and Eve, after eating of the eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, they hide, right? And it tells in the scripture passage, they hide because they were ashamed. And so I think our deep beliefs that parts have within us about, unworthiness, unlovable, like it just seems so risky. And I think to be fully loved means that all of our parts are included, not just the ones that are in the shop window, that we offer to people. So that's what makes it really hard, I think. And sometimes those parts that just have no like experience of that. It's just totally alien and foreign. And there's a fear that if I open myself up to that, I will die.
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to. So
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm thinking this is what just came from me. I'm wondering, like, at what point have I ever received love like that? I mean, I think that we learn, or our parts learn really early on. Well, I guess I can speak for myself. I think that my protective system learned early on, in order to be loved, I'll be whoever you want me to be. And so, why would that change in my romantic relationships? Why would that change with my child? Like, my system has learned to give and receive love, to be seen, to be heard, be understood. I'll be whoever you want me to be. I'm pretty good at it.
absolutely. Yeah. And parts can conform us to what we anticipate those expectations are going to be. And then we find people that will play that out with us. We'll find people that will continue the scripts, the schemas that we've developed. And we have a way of perpetuating that because there's kind of a comfort in the familiarity of the dysfunction we know. We know how it goes. We know how to navigate in that world. And so there's a kind of pseudo comfort or pseudo safety in it.
What happens that doesn't work? Like, what happens that we're like, wait a minute, I want to be receiving love, or I'm not getting the love I want, or there's some miss here. What happens that we're like, oh wait, this isn't, I'm not receiving and giving love. There's not much love happening here.
I think sometimes parts with a little bit of self energy realize that what they're seeking are counterfeits of love. They're actually looking for the closest thing that they could equate love to. But I believe that most people have parts that have never been loved by anybody on the earth. I actually believe that that is the nature of exiles, that they are just not, and it's not that people are actively, not that are actively hating on them or something necessarily. It's just that they're not registering on anybody's radar. And one of the definitions of love is to affirm what already is. It's to confirm and value what already is. And so, this idea that I could be loved might be okay for some of these other parts, might be even okay for the innermost self if parts know about the innermost self, but this part I am, that's never happened. And so how could it happen, right? And parts don't have like the perspective to be able to imagine it. And so I think what happens is they're surprised by love when it happens. And so it's to the innermost selves of people, including our own innermost self towards our parts, to surprise those parts with love in a way that's gentle, that's kind, that's attuned, and it goes beyond just goodwill or benevolence, because there's also a kind of knowing about how to be with them. So I think of love very much as about being with. And how fully am I present? Like I'm thinking right now, how fully present am I to you? Like how many of my parts are here? How much are they resonating with your parts? How much can we be together and yet it still be safe enough, so that, parts not becoming alarmed and so forth. So I'm really fascinated about getting beyond what Freud said was the maximum that psychoanalysis could do. He said that the best you can do with psychoanalysis is to get a person to a normal level of human misery, and I'm like, okay, I mean, there's a value to that. And I worked in rehabilitation psych for a while, and obviously all the recovery and so forth. But I'm also very much interested in how do we go beyond that? What's beyond that? What can parts look forward to beyond recovery, and into things like flourishing, right? Into things that are, where parts really begin to experience and taste the fullness of the possibilities. And so I naturally think about love with that, because then it's like, wow, I mean, that's motivating for parts, right? Even though it's hard right now in the recovery process, or the sort of working through the traumas and so forth. But there's something really big and beautiful also that'll come in addition to the goods I'm experiencing now. So.
What I'm noticing is I'm wondering if people listening have a little bit of a reaction like I just did, like that sounds a little bit scary though, to think
Oh
about
yeah.
kind of on the other side of this is like love, like receiving and being able to love and hope and flourishing and like, ooh, I don't know. I just noticed a little bit of
Oh yeah.
some part of me that was like, there's a little tiny bit of resistance, a little bit of fear.
Oh, absolutely. I think parts are terrified. Many parts are terrified of the prospect of being loved, because they've tried and they've been really disappointed. There's been betrayals, there's been abandonments, there's been relational wounds, attachment injuries, that have taught them in their experience, taught in quotation marks, taught them that loving isn't real, loving isn't safe, or loving isn't for me. Other people can experience that. Other parts can experience that, not me. And so, so one of the beautiful things that I think about is, how can we approach those parts? And I'm thinking about the scene in The Horse Whisperer when Robert Redford is like so gentle with that horse, that had been traumatized. Like, how can we understand that and be with those parts in other people? And then how can our own parts who have been there also contribute to that love? Because I think there's kind of 4 levels of loving, 4 levels of sort of IFS informed or parts informed loving. So
I love that. Okay, so I want to hear what the four levels of loving are. And this also reminds me of the commandments, like love your neighbor as
Right.
yourself, and this idea of how do we even do that. So, again, those are two big questions,
Two big
but
questions.
yeah.
There's been very little, I've looked into this extensively, very little ink spilled on Christian commentaries about what it means to love yourself. And most of what's out there is highly contradictory. Like
Really?
it's not cohesive, right? And I talk about this in a couple of podcast episodes. That the 94 of Interior Integration for Catholics, the primacy of love. I talk about it in 95, trauma's devastating impact on our capacity to love, because trauma has a huge impact on our capacity to love. And then this 98, self-love, what Catholics need to know. That's where I really draw out like how much contradiction there is there, or at least apparent contradiction. So there's a lot of confusion about it because it gets confused with self-absorption or selfishness or other things. But St. Thomas Aquinas is very clear that that you cannot love your neighbor more than yourself. And it also sort of stands to reason, like if we don't love ourselves, if we don't cherish ourselves, if we don't affirm ourselves, how are we going to make a gift of ourselves to somebody else? Like how would we value ourselves? So this idea of being loved first, tolerating being loved, I think it's really important to recognize that it's not easy to be loved. People think it's just sort of, something that just sort of happens, and natural. And ideally it does when you're a baby, like ideally you don't have to do anything, right? You don't have to be actively receptive to love. But as an adult, you do. As an adult, you do, or you'll default to the ways that you have defended against intimacy and vulnerability in the past. And those ways are all understandable. Like if you understand how parts, experience things and how they made sense of their experience, totally makes sense. And that's what I think the world really, really needs is people who have received enough love to be able to begin to reflect that back. And people who are loving not just with their innermost self, but who are also loving with their parts, who are in right relationship with the innermost self, who are self-led. And that kind of gets us into kind of the different levels. I actually believe that most of the really good loving, this is the first level, most of the really good loving that goes on out there comes from blended parts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I really do. I really do. I think if you imagine like before you found out about IFS, before I found out about IFS and how blended I was raising my kids, and there's still really good things that came from that, good things that I experienced from people who are blended. If there's a little bit of self-energy, if there's a little bit of, people can still be pretty blended and there can still be some really good things. I have so many people in the RCC, the Resilient Catholics community, or clients or whatever, they find out about IFS. They're like, oh my goodness, what have I done to my kids? And,
Right.
and I'm like, there's a lot of good that happens even if we're blended. And I think we need to really appreciate imperfect loves. Even if there's a little, even if there's a little bit of love there, there's still real value in that. That doesn't justify, neglect or, other things, but that's the first level. And then when we get to the second level, we're talking about really more like self-like parts, that have some of that self-energy. It's more than what you had before. And then the third level is when the innermost self is more or less unblended. Okay, so the innermost self has the freedom to be able to love, but the fourth level, this is the really outstanding, the outstanding love is when parts are relatively unburdened, they can come together, and they can begin to resonate with that self energy. They can begin to resonate with their counterparts in other people. In
Mm.
other words, I don't think the innermost self knows everything. Actually, I don't think it's sort of localized omniscience. I think the parts know things that the innermost self doesn't, or that the innermost self doesn't know without the parts being in relationship, right? So, like my hopefully former inner critic, at least in the moment, right, can really resonate with someone who's really critical of themselves right now. There's a sort of like resonance that is happening between those parts, so that that part can be experiencing love not just from my innermost self, but also from that part of me that really understands something about where that part is and what that part's experienced and so forth. So it's a part to part connection as well, but in a self-led part to part connection. So
My word one year was love. My word, I pick
mhm.
a word every year. And one year, my word was love. And I remember thinking that it was much harder for me to give and receive love than I thought it was going to be. Or even to be like, okay, is this loving? So
Right.
where are our first steps? Like where do we start?
Well, I love it when people can have a conversation with their parts about love. I mean, some of it is just sitting down with parts and kind of seeing what is love to you.
Mm. And I think people can do that already, like right now. You could probably pause the podcast and just
Yeah,
notice what is up for you as we're 20 something minutes in. Like, what are you noticing in your system? What are you noticing in your
absolutely.
body right now as you're listening to
Well, and we
this?
can do an experiential exercise that kind of facilitates that if you want. I mean, it's all up to you. Like,
Let's
I'm gonna
do it. We
let's do it.
love experiential exercises.
All right. So this would be the one I'm thinking about here is is about just kind of connecting with your parts, the ones that are available, to broach the topic of love, like how they understand it. And so it's really about just kind of the first step is kind of seeing where parts are. It's often really surprising to see what parts assume about love. To see what their unarticulated, their unspoken quote truths are about love. So that's kind of what this is about. So I just love that you do experiential exercises. I love to do them on my podcast too. So this is like a meeting of the minds right here. Parts are really excited about that. So just a couple of things. Safety. We want to talk about safety first. Like just listening to the parts, especially this topic of love, like you were alluding to, Tammy, can be evocative for certain parts, right? It can really bring up stuff. So just to really pay attention to what's going on in your body reactions, kind of bodily stuff, other stuff that's going on inside. If you're like driving or you're working out or you're doing the laundry or something, it can be good to have like a special space for this. So you might pause it, come back in a bit when you have some time to really focus in on your parts. You want that protected space. I want to just speak out, shout out to all you managers, is that we're not going to do anything without your permission. Okay, we're gonna really honor and respect the roles that you managers have taken, and we only work by permission, and we work collaboratively and cooperatively. So there's no sneakiness, there's no any of that, right? You guys will be on board as much as you want to be. And I'm going to just invite you to take what's helpful. You don't have to do this. And you can, if you find that you're going in a different direction that's more fruitful, feel free to go in that direction. Um, there'll be some silence in this, just so that you can kind of connect more deeply with your parts. I don't want to talk over that. If you need more silence, feel free to pause it, kind of really enter in. It can be helpful to have pencil and paper if you want to write in a parts journal or draw something out. But in that silence, I'm trusting you. I trust that your innermost self has what you need to begin to broach this with your parts. And if you ever do feel, I don't expect this, but if you ever do feel overwhelmed, or if there's some kind of blending going on or something like that, okay, feel free to take that break. Kind of reground yourself, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of freedom here to kind of do that. So yeah. So with that sort of, let's kind of get into it. And I'm going to start with this little word, just a really little word called be. We're just thinking about being with first our managers. You know, we don't have an agenda here to change anybody inside. We don't have some sort of, mission to make any part different than he or she or it is. but to kind of go to that sense of being with, and to parts that feel ready, that feel like it's okay, to hear what they believe, what they assume about love. And there could be some surprises here. Just going to invite you, if it feels safe enough, again, to tune into those assumptions. Being loved and loving. What do your parts want you to know about their understanding or their experience of love? If you notice that you're, kind of got any criticism there or any negativity towards parts, that's another part. See if that part can give you some space. And if not, that's okay. Then focus on that part. Might be some roles here around love. Might be some burdens around love in some way. You might focus on just one part, or if it feels okay, to hear from other parts. If your protectors are okay with that, you might start hearing from other parts. Just an invitation here for parts to listen in to other parts' stories about love and how they understood it, how they experienced it or didn't, or the distortions of love, the counterfeits. If parts are open to hearing about other parts' stories with a big open heart, kind of connected with your innermost self, might begin to make more sense why parts feel and think and have the impulses and desires they do. Might happen, might not. It's okay. And is it interesting to parts, this idea that they might be included in the loving? Is it interesting to your parts that there may be ways they can contribute to your loving that no other part can do, and that the innermost self could never do for you? That they're so indispensable. They're absolutely necessary. Every instrument that your parts play is needed in your jazz band. This might be unimaginable to some parts, and if they're having trouble with that, okay, totally get it. But some parts might be able to grip onto the idea that not only can they contribute to the music, but that they might take a solo. They might go improvisational. They might, again, staying with your leader, right? Staying with your innermost self, right? Following the key, staying with the beat. But there may be moments where that part actually takes the lead in a self-led way, because that's what a part of another person needs. Or maybe there's another part within you that needs love from that part. It's not just the innermost self that's going to do the loving. We're called to love wholeheartedly, with your whole heart. Is that imaginable that other parts of you might be included in that love? Can you protectors, can you imagine that? That a part that maybe you're afraid of or concerned about, that part might one day be able to love as well. Not just be burdened or in an extreme role, but might be free. And is that interesting? Yes, even that part. Yes, it includes that part, actually. The one that might seem so far away from being able to love right now. All of you parts are beautifully and wonderfully made. It can be hard for some parts to see that. I get it. And so I'm going to invite you, your system, to kind of sit down and think about what might be the next right step for you. What might be a good next step in this idea of loving? What might help tolerating being loved? A next step for a particular part. But also, let's not forget about the other side. We don't have to be perfectly ordered to be able to love. What might be a next right step for loving? How might a part of you be more involved in that with your innermost self? We got those 8 C's. If we've got some self-energy, that creativity, that connectedness, that compassion, what might be coming up in there? And maybe there can be like, something that you all agree that would be a good thing to do. Maybe there's a little commitment there, to say, hey, I'm going to take this next step and see where that leads me, step by step. We don't have to take the whole journey in one great big leap, just step by step. And just want to let you know that my parts are so grateful for the beautiful inner work you do. My parts love meeting their counterparts and other people. They love connecting at a deep level. So I'm grateful for the work you do internally across all my parts. And so, from my parts to your parts, just a lot of love and affection, fondness and appreciation. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Peter. That was unbelievable. Do you want to share what happened for me?
Oh, I'd love to. But I will say, just can you check in first, just to be sure that, just to be sure that parts are good with whatever you're going to share. And to also know that we can edit out anything. You can edit out anything if in post-production, if it doesn't land right with a part, to hear it, and think, oh, it's going out to all my audience, and stuff like that. So just a lot of consideration that way, because I know you're a very public person, Tammy. I know, and I know you've got a big open heart, and I love that about you. But I also wonder sometimes, about just parts feeling like, can we be private if there is something? And I'm not saying there is, I don't know, but just some respect that way.
I love that. And there was an awareness of that the whole time. Like there was awareness of, you can share this, but don't share this.
I love
the
it.
whole time.
Love it.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? There's I don't know if this happens for you, Peter, but there's something that tries to be aware, like you're on a podcast, like people are listening. Like sometimes parts of me forget that, but then sometimes, there is some awareness of like, okay. So what feels okay to share is a polarization, really. This polarization of parts of me, and it actually feels like younger parts of me that really want to experience love. Like have felt it a couple of times, or like we love that feeling. We want it again. We want to do that, be that, give that, receive that. Like that feels really good. But it feels very whispery. What feels louder is this list of like guards, gates, love is conditional, love is gamey, can't be trusted. I mean, on and on and on and on and on, and some exile stuff that I can hear. That's like, oh, there's some protectors around some major exiles for me, and that's what's really loud. And so I could just, even being able to feel both felt really good, because I could only really feel the one at first, right? Like nope, 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 nope. And then this like little girl was like, but remember when we felt this? And it was like, oh yeah. So then I felt like I could kind of unblend from both kind of energies, and then just really be with both, even though this one on the right hand side, it just feels the kind of the guard feels stronger. But yeah, that's what happened for me.
There's a psychologist by the name of Dr. Peter Martin. We did our level 1 training together. We've been friends for a long time, and he's done a lot with resource figures. I call them spiritual confidants. And he says that the exiles really want to connect with these wisdom figures or nurturing figures, and the managers are far less open to that. It's really interesting, right? The idea that the exiles are really open in some ways to this love, but the protectors just don't feel safe with that. So it totally makes sense to me. And in my own life too, Right. I came from an environment where it wasn't safe to show weakness, and so very defended. Right. I had parts that were good at intimidating other people, in order to try to feel safe and, kind of large and in charge and yeah, I mean those parts. It took a long while to soften enough to be able to recognize that, hey, I have needs too. Because I think sometimes our managers are, in some ways, relieved of a burden of being loved by the exiles. They don't realize it, but the exiles are carrying the burden of needing love, so that the managers can function in day-to-day life and not be overwhelmed by that. So, but the managers often don't realize that or appreciate it. But that's where we need to remember that we're a multiplicity, but we're also one, which is why I love the title of your podcast, which is The One Inside. There's an emphasis on the unity, as well as the multiplicity. And sometimes I think this happened for me. I got so fascinated with multiplicity that I started to lose track of how we are one. And so, what that means is that if something is wrong, if it's harmful, if it's hurtful for one part of us, it's going to impact all of us because we're one.
Well, I love that. And to flip that around, if internally my I can give love to my exiles, then I can also give love to my managers. Like we can all receive that internal love that actually feels so much safer to my system. Like they can receive love from me, from the divine, from spirit guides. Like that feels like okay, so there's a little bit of I'm getting a little bit more buy-in right now, like, oh, Peter's saying that we could practice this internally. And my system's like, ooh, I'm open for that. Like, we like that idea. That does not feel dangerous to practice this love and that we all get to feel it. The managers, the firefighters that I'm giving like a high five to, like, love them. Like, we all get to feel it inside.
Yeah, no part left behind, right? No
Yeah.
part left behind
Yeah.
with this. And I do believe that the innermost self is a conduit of graces and also a bridge, right? So many times I find that if parts can begin to trust the innermost self, find the innermost self to be a secure internal attachment figure, then the innermost self can introduce the parts to, for example, the three persons of the Trinity, or to the Virgin Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary, or to their guardian angel, for example, or something like that. And that's a beautiful thing, because I think, like, for example, God, he doesn't want to just come in and work with us on a part by part basis. He doesn't want to bypass the innermost self. He doesn't want to just come in and intrude and connect with the part. Even if parts want that, he wants to work with us as a system, not just in a fragmented way. And he's so gentle about it. In Genesis 3, Adam and Eve are totally freaked out. They're hiding, they're terrified, they're bickering already. And what does God do? He comes and he calls out to them. He lets them know that he's coming. He knows exactly where they are. He's not, he's got them located. It's not like, but he's letting them know, and he doesn't condemn them. He doesn't curse them. He curses the ground, he curses the serpent, but he doesn't condemn them. And he provides for their needs. He gives them clothing, for example, and things like that. So that's like unimaginable to some of our parts, because we have parts tend to make God in the image and likeness of the authority figures, the powerful figures that they've known, with their good qualities, but also with, the times where there was a lack of attunement, a lack of connection. And often what I think is the most serious thing, the anti-love, if you will, is neglect. It's not the abuse. That's not to say that abuse isn't bad or harmful or sinful. It is. But if you look at those two great commandments, which are all about love, right? What's the opposite of them? Unlove, right? And yes, you can have malice as a form of not loving, but what I think is far more common is just like disconnection, like just, not apathy, not connecting, right? And I don't think it takes malice. I think of so many ways in which people don't connect, that's grounded in fear or shame, or other ways. Then that stuff we really want to be able to overcome, because it starts to break these cycles then. And I'm really hopeful that that's going to continue to happen. I think we're so much more informed now than we ever have been about like what we need as human beings to thrive and to flourish. So.
Well, Peter, on that note, that hopeful, loving note, why don't you tell everybody where they can find all the things that you do?
So the main website is Souls and Hearts, soulsandhearts.com. We're also Interior Integration for Catholics. You can pick that up wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also on YouTube. We're on video. Couple of interesting resources. One is at soulsandhearts.com/TOC, stands for Table of Contents. We have almost all of our resources there in alphabetical order. So if you want to find some particular thing, you can look it up there. We've got search bars and so forth. And then also, our communities, the Resilient Catholics community, and then also the Formation for Formators community, because I have a huge passion about the human formation of Catholic therapists, spiritual directors, coaches, those who accompany people individually. I think what holds people up so much in those roles is their own stuff. That's what gets in the way so often, I've seen. So we do a lot with that as well. It's all at soulsandhearts.com. So.
That's amazing. And so, Peter, last question.
Yes.
If you had to do something different than what you do in your life, what would you do? You get to and you have to. What would you do different? Yeah, you get to and you have to.
I would love to be a professional ultimate frisbee player part-time, at 55 years old, right? I mean,
it could happen. Yeah.
I'm really happy doing what I'm doing. I'm so blessed. And, but if I had to do something different, and I could, I will say this because it's coming up, and I've thought about this before. There's parts of me that would venture into politics, the most sort of wild and woolly and sort of difficult domain, to try to work in. There's parts of me that actually would be interested in that, knowing like how difficult it could be to be close, right? To love in the political arena. Like, so there's parts of me that are like, that would be a challenge.
You will take that challenge on.
Yeah, but I have no interest in running for office. I'm happy the way that I am. So.
Not yet. Yeah. Well, thank you for this. This was great. And I love any just excuses to hang out with you. So thank you so much. Thanks for hanging out with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you left a rating, a review, a like, comment, share with your family, your friends. That would mean so much to me. My book is available at your favorite independent bookstore or on Amazon. You can visit my website, tammysalenberger.com, or you can download a free Get to Know a Should part of you. You can follow me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and at The One Inside on Facebook and on YouTube. Jeff Schrum co-produces The One Inside, and I am forever grateful for Jeff. Also thankful for Jack Reardon for creating the music, and just thank you for listening. 6 seasons, over 1 million downloads. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you in this community. I'll see you next time.